Well, a lot of historians of science have tried to explain what gave rise to the scientific revolution. They've asked there's a famous, let me just start over on that. There's a famous historian of science, Joseph Needham, who was himself a Marxist in his worldview, who asked a famous question about the origin of modern science. And the question was, why there and why then? We've had great civilizations. The Chinese made gunpowder and had a very sophisticated civilization. You go back to the ancient Egyptians. You have the Romans had their aqueducts and their roads. In Muslim countries, you had development of mathematics, but you don't see this systematic approach to interrogating nature. The systematic methods for investigating nature develop until this period of the scientific revolution. I mean, we could also talk about the Greeks, but there were many things about the Greek way of philosophizing about nature that actually held back empirical investigation. And so Needham was very curious, well, why in Western Europe? Why then in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s? And the answer that he and numerous other historians have come to is that the difference that made the difference was the worldview. That there was something about the Judeo-Christian way of thinking that inspired the scientific investigation of nature. Rodney Stark's title captures some of that. He says, "For the glory of God." The scientists were motivated to study what they believed were the works of God to bring glory to him. But that's really only part of it. There were other assumptions that were really part of a biblical worldview, one of which was that nature is intelligible. It could be understood because our minds are made in the image of the same mind who made the rational order in nature that we're studying. And that was one of the reasons that mathematics was so prized by Newton and Kepler and others, that they believed that the language of nature was mathematical and that was an expression of the divine mind. But there were other premises. One was that nature was a created order, but the order that it manifested was contingent on the will of the creator. It could have been otherwise. I used to use an illustration when I was teaching on this, if you have a whole bunch of paintbrushes, but there's a whole bunch of different ways to use. You've got fat ones and skinny ones and tiny ones. They all have roughly the same function, the same Aristotelian final cause to place paint on a canvas, but that Aristotelian way of thinking of final causes, and the Greek way generally, the Greeks thought of the logos as the fundamental underlying explanation of things, this sort of deep logic that even the gods had to obey. Okay, and so that meant that there was a logically necessary way that nature had to be, and the job of the philosopher thinking about nature in the Greek context was simply to think, well, what is the most logical way that nature should be? So they came up with the idea of perfectly circular orbits, because that was the perfect geometric form. So that was the way that nature should and had to be. And we had 2,000 years of Ptolemaic astronomy based on the idea of circular orbits. And it wasn't till the scientific revolution that people said, well, maybe we should go out and look and see what what the motions of the planets really actually reveal. And Robert Boyle captured it beautifully. He said that it is not the job of the natural philosopher to ask what God must have done, but instead to go out and look and see what he actually did do. Okay, and so that the impulse to
Francis Bacon
to investigate things empirically came out of a view that yes, nature was a created order, but it could have been created in many different ways. Newton might have discovered that gravity had an inverse square law, which is what he did discover, or maybe gravity might have been an inverse cube law, or maybe it was just a linear function. There were many different possible ways that nature could have been ordered, and it was our job as the natural philosophers to look and see what was done. So that was another premise. Nature was a created order. It was intelligible, but it was also contingent on the will of the creator. So we had to go and look and see.